Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of the Roundabout Way of Fate. This will be Part 8, Chapter 6, entitled The Change. Inko is overjoyed when Recovery Girl talks to her about training Izuku. The boy doesn't think he's ever seen his mother agree to something so quickly before in her life. She sputters and thanks Recovery Girl repeatedly, until Izuku whines for her to stop. The healer tells them that she'll come over during the weekend to hash out the details, but she needs to talk to Principal Nezu first. "You're going to be a bit of a special case," she says, "but I'm sure he'll be fine with it. He might actually want to personally meet you." Izuku nearly faints. First All Might, then Recovery Girl, and now Principal Nezu? Seriously? Recovery Girl laughs. "Of course, it's not every day UA gets a new apprentice healer." Before they leave, both she and All Might give him their personal phone numbers, so they can keep in contact with him. Izuku nearly faints again, especially when All Might tells him to write Toshinori Yagi in his contacts. His real name. Izuku knows All Might's real name. The #1 hero explains that he doesn't want anyone to accidentally see All Might's name pop up in Izuku's phone. He also gives Izuku permission to refer to him as Toshinori when they're with other people. "I both mentally and physically cannot do that," Izuku says, causing All Might to let out a bark of laughter. "But I'll try." Needless to say, when Izuku gets home that night, he's very emotionally, mentally, and physically worn out. Sushi greets him happily, and he lets out a sigh of relief as he hugs his cat. He can't believe how much happened in one day. Thankfully, it's a Friday, so he doesn't have to worry about school tomorrow. Inko is still squealing in excitement about the news. "Oh, my baby, I'm so proud of you," she cries, hugging him tightly. "It's like you got scouted." Izuku laughs and squirms out of her grasp. The next day is rather calm. Much to his relief, the majority of his nausea has subsided by now, but he's still rather weak and tires quickly with movement. So he spends most of the day either napping or lying on the couch with Sushi. He uses his phone to Google healer training, but he doesn't find much information aside from the regular training medical students go through to treat patients through traditional quirkless means. Since healers are so rare, it's not like there's one specific school for them, so Izuku puts his phone away and figures he'll just leave it to Recovery Girl. Maybe he'll ask what her training experience was like. Most of her biographies only focus on the work she did as an adult. On Sunday, Recovery Girl texts him asking if she can come over, and he immediately says yes, canceling his usual self-defense class without a thought. Not that Inko would even let him go in his condition, although by Sunday, he's at least able to stand up without his legs trembling, so that's an improvement. He makes a mental note to never let himself succumb to quirk exhaustion ever again. To his surprise, when Recovery Girl arrives, she's not alone. His heart leaps to his throat as none other than Principal Nezu trots in after her. Before Izuku can choke out a greeting, the furry white creature hops up to him and takes his hand. "Midoriya-kun," he chirps. "So very nice to meet you. I've been hearing a lot about you lately." Huh? Izuku's mind can't focus on anything aside from the fact that the Principal Nezu is shaking his hand. "Of course he has," Recovery Girl says. "We've been busy discussing your future at UA. May we come in?" Izuku nods hastily and steps aside, letting them walk past him. Into his house. Oh God, Principal Nezu and Recovery Girl are in his house. Inko does her best not to fret over their guests too much, but hurriedly sets out some tea on the coffee table in front of them as they take a seat on the couch. She makes to excuse herself, but Nezu insists that she stay, saying, "As his mother, this involves you as much as it involves Midoriya-kun." So Izuku and his mother end up sitting next to each other, both trying not to show just how nervous they are, right across from the healer and the principal. Sushi is squirming in his lap, clearly wanting to go over and sniff their new guests. The cat is staring at Nezu with an intensity that makes Izuku nervous, so he tightens his hold on him. Thankfully, Recovery Girl wastes no time getting right down to business. They discuss how he'll be accomplishing his training, seeing as his particular situation is a bit different from the other students'. They want him to be able to get the general education that he needs, as well as be able to train as both a hero and a healer. Therefore, they've decided that it would be best if Izuku were to meet with Recovery Girl after regular classes have finished, since he can't sacrifice one of his classes during the school day in order to meet with her. That way, he'll be able to accommodate all three facets of his particular education into his schedule. I realize that this will probably be very difficult and time-consuming for you, Recovery Girl says. And I know we're asking you to give us more of your day than we are for your other students. However, as a healer, you're going to have to expect to be working a little bit harder than your peers. You're going to be learning what the Hero Course students are learning in addition to what I will be teaching you. Of course, Izuku nods determinedly. I'll work hard. Good, Recovery Girl says, because I would like to get started as soon as possible. He blinks in surprise, but she simply turns to the bag she brought with her and takes out a massive book. She plops it onto the coffee table with a loud bang, and Izuku's eyes widen at the thickness of it. Human Anatomy and Physiology, she says. This book has everything you need to know about the human body and then some. I've had it for decades, and it's one of my most reliable resources. She looks at him. I want you to have it read 3 times front to back by the time you get to UA. Izuku stares at the heavy book in front of him. God, there must be at least 1,000 pages. Inko pats his back sympathetically. In addition to this, Recovery Girl says, I don't want you to rely on your quirk anymore to heal people. That makes Izuku look up at her. You're not actually supposed to be allowed to use your quirk in public, she says. And unlicensed healing quirks can only be used under the supervision of a medical professional. Izuku glances at his mother in confusion. Have I been breaking the law? He blurts. I always heal my friends. Recovery Girl gives him an amused smile. Well, it's a very lax rule, but your excuse can be that you were just young and unaware. Izuku feels very stupid. Of course quirks aren't allowed to be used in public. He knew that. Why did he think it didn't apply to him, too? Right. So for now, let's just focus on learning everything you can about human anatomy, and once you're in UA, we'll start working with your quirk, she says, and Izuku nods. Of course, Principal Nezu pipes up. You actually have to get into UA first. Izuku jumps. Right, of course, He turns to Recovery Girl. You said something about recommendations earlier, right? He's hesitant, just in case she's changed her mind. They've already offered him so much. It seems rude to expect more, but the older woman simply nods. Yes, Toshinori-san has offered to be your sponsor, she says. Toshinori-san? Inko asks, frowning in confusion. Who's that? My colleague, Recovery Girl replies easily, saving Izuku from having to lie to his mother. Here's the blonde man that was with me on Friday. Oh! Inko still looks a bit confused, but she doesn't ask any more questions. Wait a minute, Izuku says. If I'm going to be your, apprentice, then why don't you recommend me? Principal Nezu answers this time. That is because Recovery Girl is a member of UA's staff, and no one who is a member of our staff is allowed to sponsor a student, in the event that they might give them an unfair advantage by telling them what the recommendation test will entail beforehand. It's an old rule, but one with merit, so we still abide by it. Oh, Izuku says. That makes sense, I guess. Also, Toshinori-san will be working at UA come next spring, but he's still allowed to sponsor you since he won't have any prior experience with the recommendation test by the time it comes, Recovery Girl says. Izuku's eyes widen. All Might is going to be a teacher at UA? That's incredible. Is he going to be teaching a heroics class? Is Izuku going to be taught by All Might? As for the actual recommendation test, Recovery Girl goes on, your main focus should be on passing the written portion. There is a physical portion as well, but the judges will be made aware of your situation, so you won't be expected to do an exemplary job. Just do the best you can and maybe consider doing some sort of athletic training in the months beforehand to help you succeed. Izuku nods. I've been taking self-defense classes since I was 10, he says. And I run with my friend a lot. He trails off when Kacchan comes to his mind. Principal Nezu and Recovery Girl seem pleased. That's very good, the healer says. Well then, all I can tell you now is to study hard and stay focused. I'll be anticipating your arrival at UA. Thank you. Izuku grins, standing up when the adults do. They bid their goodbyes and leave shortly after. Izuku shuts the door behind them before leaning his back against it, clutching his chest. Holy shit, he exclaims breathlessly. Inko giggles and swats his arm. I can't believe this is actually happening to me. I can, Inko says. You're going to be a wonderful healer, baby. She kisses his forehead gently before glancing at the book on the table. And you have a lot of homework to do. Izuku groans, and she walks away giggling. Later that night, while his mother is making dinner, Izuku finds himself lying on his couch with the medical book in hand. He tries to balance it on his stomach, but it's so heavy that he has to put a pillow between it and his stomach in order for the position to work. He's just cracked it open when his phone buzzes on the coffee table. The screen shows a text from Toshinori Yagi. Izuku's confused for a moment before realizing. All Might. He just got a text from the #1 hero himself. When All Might had given him his number, Izuku assumed it would only be for emergencies or to discuss logistics when the time came for the recommendation test. He never thought he'd be getting a text 2 days after he'd met the man. He quickly grabs his phone and unlocks it. Toshinori, 7:15 p.m. How did your talk with the mouse go? Mouse? What? Oh, he must be talking about Principal Nezu. Smiling a bit, Izuku types his response. It went well, I think. Then, after a moment of consideration, he adds, Are you sure he's a mouse? I thought he looked more like a bear. He sets his phone down and cracks the book open once more. However, a minute later he gets a response. Mouse, bear, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. Anyway, I wanted to ask whether or not he told you that I'm going to be working at UA next year. Recovery Girl mentioned it. That must be super exciting. Are you going to teach the hero course? Yes, although I find myself rather apprehensive. I've never been a teacher before. I'm sure you'll do great. Izuku attached an emoji to his message. What does that mean? Izuku slaps a hand over his face, blushing furiously. Why did he add that emoji? It means that you're super strong, and that you've got this. For some reason, Izuku gets the sense that All Might is probably laughing at him. Ah, forgive me. I am getting old. All Might, you're not old. I believe the proper response is LOL. Izuku snorts. Izuku, honey, dinner is ready, Inko calls from the kitchen. Coming. Still smiling, Izuku pushes his book aside and gets up. He barely pays attention to his mother as he eats, typing out messages and giggling at the responses he gets. God, it feels so weird to be texting All Might. He's a lot funnier than he thought he'd be. But it's a surprisingly dry type of humor that Izuku wouldn't have expected from someone like him. The boy is sent into peals of laughter when All Might reacts in dramatic horror to the picture of the anatomy book he got from Recovery Girl. Inko keeps glancing at him throughout the night, clearly wondering who he's texting, but not wanting to pry. She just smiles at the sparkle in his eyes as he grins down at his phone and leaves him to it. Izuku ends up texting back and forth with All Might for the next couple of hours. The book goes unread, and Sushi sits on his chest as he lies in bed, idly petting his cat with one hand and typing with the other. Eventually, he has to bid goodbye because he has to wake up early for school the next day, and he's so giddy with happiness that he doesn't even have time to realize that he'll have to see Kacchan again tomorrow before he falls asleep. School is tense the next day, not because of the classes. Izuku's never really had much trouble when it comes to grades. It's tense because of Kacchan. They walked to school together in total silence. Kacchan kept a whole foot of space between them and didn't say a word, not even the occasional growl or scoff. Izuku knows his mother told Auntie Mitsuki about Recovery Girl taking him under her wing, so Kacchan must know too, but he doesn't say anything about it. Well, that's fine. If Kacchan wants to give him the cold shoulder, Izuku will give it right back. So Izuku ignores the blonde during class and sits with Haru during lunch. The boy is surprised and glances nervously at Kacchan, but Izuku tells him not to worry about him. And if Tsubasa and Inaba are wondering why he's not sitting with them anymore, they don't ask about it. That's how pretty much the entire week goes. Izuku has never gone so long without speaking to Kacchan before in his life. Inko canceled his self-defense classes for the whole week because, despite how much he might deny it, he's still not quite feeling 100% back to normal. He doesn't feel awful, there's just a lingering tiredness, like he's slowly regaining his strength. But Enko refuses to budge, so that means Kacchan has to walk him home right after school on days when they would usually go train. But Izuku doesn't know if he goes to his own lessons right after. He doesn't ask. He doesn't talk to him. It's both refreshing and exhausting. The former, because he's finally able to rekindle his friendship with Haru and spend time with other people without Kacchan hanging on his shoulder. The latter, because, well, it's hard to stay angry for so long. Izuku's never really been one to hold grudges, so this is kind of new for him. He's not sure how long the whole silent treatment thing is supposed to last. When can things go back to normal? How will he know whether or not Kacchan has learned his lesson if he doesn't talk to him? But Izuku doesn't want to be the first to reach out, so instead he watches him, keeps an eye out for the nasty behavior that he hates so much. And to his surprise, he sees nothing. Kacchan is still far from polite, but for some reason he seems to be holding his tongue. There are plenty of opportunities where he would normally lash out with fury, but instead, he just growls and turns the other way. It's almost as if he's sulking. It's odd. Practically a complete 180 for his behavior, and Izuku isn't the only one that notices. "Damn, Izuku, what'd you do to him?" Haru asks him one day during lunch. He eyes the blonde from across the cafeteria and arches a brow. Izuku sighs. It's been 2 weeks since he's last spoken to Kacchan. He'd be lying if he said he didn't miss him. He munches on some noodles and mumbles. I don't know, told him off." Haru snorts. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say you neutered him." Izuku sputters, and the boy snickers. "Hey, I won't judge. It worked when I got a dog that needed to calm down." "Kacchan's not a dog," Izuku says, but he can't help giggling a little. "Sure." Izuku flicks a piece of broccoli at him. Later, when he's walking home from school with Kacchan, the silence seems to press down on him harder than before. He fidgets uncomfortably, glancing at the blonde. Kacchan makes no effort to seem like he even notices Izuku's presence. Sighing loudly, Izuku asks, "Do you want to go get ice cream?" Kacchan stops and glances at him. His face is confused for a moment, as if he isn't sure if Izuku is even talking to him. Then his expression closes off, and he shrugs indifferently. There's a small ice cream shop near their neighborhood, so they make their way over there. Kacchan wordlessly pays for them both before they continue walking back home. Izuku is content to lick at his mint and chip ice cream cone in silence while Kacchan near assaults his Rocky Road cone. They finish before they reach the former's house, but when Izuku steps up to open his door, he hesitates. Kacchan is still standing on the sidewalk, watching him when he glances over his shoulder. He always watches Izuku go into his house, as if to make sure he actually makes it inside, even though his door is right there. Their eyes lock. Izuku opens his mouth to ask something. He doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know if it'll make things better or worse. He ends up losing his confidence and scrambling into his house. Sushi meows at him judgmentally, but he just sighs heavily and goes to start on his homework. And once he finishes that, he starts on his other homework. Human anatomy and physiology. Even though it's been 2 weeks since he's received it, he's only just barely finished chapter 1. It's not that he doesn't find it interesting, it's just very dry. He definitely is learning a lot, but it's kind of hard to remember it all when the text is so small and there's so much of it on every page. It's as if the book is really 2,000 pages, but they just needed to save paper, so they just crammed it into 1,000 pages. He's grateful that there's pictures because a lot of the stuff would be very confusing without the visual aid. And at least Recovery Girl has also highlighted important parts and written down her own notes in it, although that's probably from her own studying, and not done specifically for him. Still, it's just dry, and he doesn't want to say boring, but he often finds his mind trailing off when he's staring at a page, and then he has to go back and reread it. He's determined to finish it, though. Even if he doesn't like it, he will read the whole book and remember everything he can from it. So, with this determined mindset, he sits down on the couch and cracks it open once more. Ingo comes home from work an hour later to find Izuku with his face smushed against the pages, drooling slightly. "Okay, I never thought I'd say this," Haru says, "but you need to talk to him." Izuku lifts his head up from where it was leaning against his palm and frowns. What? Dude, you're miserable, Haru says. You've got a red mark on your cheek from leaning against it so much. That's a classic sign of moping. I'm not moping, Izuku protests as he rubs his cheek petulantly. And I'm not miserable, I don't need him. Haru rolls his eyes. Yeah, and I don't need porn, but look how much happier I am with it in my life. Ew, Izuku grimaces. What's with you comparing Kacchan to weird things? Because he is a weird thing. Haru points at Izuku with his chopsticks. A weird thing that you need in your life. I thought you hated him. Oh, I do, he replies firmly. But you gotta admit, he has changed a bit. Whatever you said to him really made him shape up. Sure, he's still an ass, but he hasn't gotten into a fight in almost a month. That's gotta count for something. Izuku stares at him, then sighs. He glances at Kacchan sitting with Tsubasa and Inaba across the cafeteria. It's just... I don't know, he says. I've always had him in my life, you know, and it's weird that he's not anymore. But I don't even know what I would say to him at this point. I don't know how to fix this. He falls silent, picking at his rice without much appetite. Haru gazes at him for a few moments, then sighs. Well, I think I have an idea, he says, standing up. Izuku raises an eyebrow questioningly, but Haru doesn't say anything else, instead grabbing his tray of food and walking away. Izuku watches him leave, confused as to what he's doing until he realizes he's walking over to Kacchan's table. He bolts up. Haru-kun! He abandons his tray and starts running towards him, but there's no way he can get there in time. All he can do is watch as Haru walks behind Kacchan and not so accidentally spills his drink over his head. The reaction is immediate. Kacchan roars and jumps to his feet, whirling around to snarl at Haru. What the fuck do you think you're doing, bastard? Oops. Haru raises his hands innocently. It was an accident. Kacchan's fists clench and his body tenses up, ready to pounce. Izuku's heart leaps to his throat, and for a moment, Haru looks scared too. Everyone in the cafeteria stares, waiting for a fight to break out. To all of their surprise, however, all Kacchan does is get in Haru's face and yell, "Fuck you!" before he storms off. Izuku freezes, his eyes wide with disbelief. Kacchan didn't start a fight. He was certain he would. A month ago, he would have murdered Haru for spilling his drink on him. But he didn't do anything. His lips twitch upward, without him realizing it. Haru turns to him, as everyone goes back to their lunches, and smirks. It falls a moment later, and he looks strangely somber for a brief second. Then his face lights up again, and he jerks his head to the door. Go after him, Izuku. Breaking out into a full-on grin, Izuku smothers Haru in a hug and whispers in his ear, "Thank you." Then he lets go and races out of the cafeteria after Kacchan. He finds him in the boys' bathroom, grumbling obscenities under his breath as he tries to wipe the juice out of his uniform with a damp paper towel. They both freeze when they see each other. Kacchan stares for a few seconds before scowling. "Did you set that fucker up?" he growls accusingly. Izuku shakes his head. "No." Silence follows. Kacchan swallows and turns away sharply, going back to rubbing his uniform. Izuku exhales slowly and steps closer. Kacchan doesn't move, but his eyes do flicker towards him briefly before looking away. He scrubs harder. "It'll be easier if you just..." Izuku finally reaches him and puts a hand on his arm, stilling his movements. Just take it off," he says quietly. He reaches up and slowly unbuttons his uniform, sliding it off his shoulders and leaving him in his undershirt. Kacchan watches him with an unreadable expression as he takes it and turns toward the sink. He holds the stained part under the water and reaches to turn on the faucet. Something bumps the back of his head. It takes him a moment to realize it's Kacchan's forehead. He pauses. They stay silent for a long time, just listening to each other breathe. Izuku's hands clutch the edge of the sink as tears prick the edge of his eyes. A hard lump forms in his throat. He realizes now why he's been feeling so awful for the past few weeks. It's not because he's still mad at Kacchan for what he said. I miss you. Kacchan's voice rumbles in his ear. Izuku sighs, but he stays silent. The stained uniform is forgotten in front of him. A moment later, Kacchan continues. Can we talk? Izuku sniffles. Sure. Silence. I mean, not like serious talk, Kacchan grunts, his forehead still pressed against him. Just talk. Izuku nods. Okay, he says quietly. Nothing happens for a few seconds after that, but then slowly, ever so slowly, Kacchan's arms wrap around his middle, pulling him closer. Izuku inhales deeply and shifts in his hold, turning around so they can hug properly. He wraps his arms around his friend and leans his head against his shoulder, closing his eyes. Kacchan buries his nose in green curls and takes a deep, shuddering breath. He isn't sure how long they stay like that, just holding on to each other in the middle of the boys' bathroom during their lunch period. All he knows is that, for the first time in weeks, he feels whole, like everything is going to be okay now. Izuku smiles and hugs him a bit tighter. Then, do you want to play video games after school? Kacchan lets out a huff of laughter, and he feels it against his chest. Yeah, he replies softly. Yeah, let's do that. The lunch bell rings before they can remember to wash the uniform, but neither of them care that much. Izuku's never been so excited to walk home later that day. It's still kind of quiet. Kacchan finally asks him about getting scouted by Recovery Girl, and Izuku's more than happy to tell him about it. But there's still plenty of pauses and somewhat awkward silences here and there. But Izuku finds himself not minding that so much. It's hard to mind when Kacchan's finally back on his couch again, sitting beside him and getting fully invested in whatever video game they're playing this time. Izuku keeps glancing at him throughout their game, and when he inevitably loses, all he does is smile and giggle. As Kacchan gloats over his win, Izuku leans against his side and lets his cheek smush against the other boy's shoulder. He's missed his player too. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 6 of Roundabout Way of Fate. Chapter 7 is going to be up next. Eager to hear your thoughts and reactions to this one, as the two boys are kind of making their way back to their friendship. Let me know those thoughts and reactions in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for listening.